Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you have kids or maybe even grandchildren, or you happen to have a niece or a nephew that's much younger, of which you have to take care of sometimes. Well, saying all of that is because from my experience as a dad, so to say, one of the most pleasant experiences when my kids were younger is to read bedtime stories for them. It's an unendless thing. And my oldest daughter, she's now 19, she wanted to have a story over and over and over again. And oh boy, if I were to skip one little detail, one word, even one comma, she would correct me. Well, I'm saying that to you because our search for the correct historical tempo, whatever that may be in your opinion, let's say the historical use of the metronome marks, because that is the historically correct tempo, it's a similar thing. It's a never-ending story. And sometimes I feel like opening a book and you want to just continue the next day, because that was the practice with my youngest daughter. She wanted to have a new story every day. And so last week we touched upon something really fascinating, namely this book written by Adolf Bernhard Marx, Beethoven Piano Works, obviously written in German first. If you haven't seen that video, I can summarize it very quickly. Marx wrote this book in 1863, and if you're not familiar who he is, here's a short bio. He was not Mr. Nobody. He was born in 1795. He knew the Mendelssohn, so came from that circles, was involved in also the St. Matthew Passion when Mendelssohn, that famous, it's maybe even a premiere after Bach, not really, but you know, Bach and Mendelssohn really brought Bach on an international scene, so to say. It was a major effort. Also the revival, so to say, of Bach's music on a more international level. Anyways, Mr. Marx was not Mr. Nobody, and his pieces that he wrote for the Berlin Allgemeines Musikalische Zeitung were very much appreciated by nobody less than Mr. Beethoven. And so last week we focused on this passage in which Marx actually focused in on not only the Appassionata, but especially the Presto of the F major sonata opus 10. That's the sonata number 6. And basically from the position that Marx had, namely that musicians in his days took tempi way too quick, at the same time acknowledging the metronome marks of the past, which is really, really important. So Marx was not advocating for slower tempi as many musicologists today would suggest. He was just saying that people were playing the music way faster than was customary in Beethoven's days. And so I ask you the simple question, since Alberto, my partner in crime and co-pianist of the Beethoven symphonies, who is in the midst of recording all Beethoven keyboard works, and also the opus 10 number 2, that's the sonata number 6, if his tempo, which was Haslinger's tempo, Karl Czerny's tempo, half note 96, made more sense in whole beat or in single beat. And so we listened the fragment to the version in whole beat, which was this one. And then I created Cyborg Alberto because I didn't find a recording that was fast enough to play 96 single beat. And so Cyborg Alberto is playing 96 single beat here. And so the conclusion of that video was not only that, which one do you pick? Because Marx actually said like, okay, when you play that presto too fast, then the humor of the passage would be lost. Well, what kind of humor is still in this music? Maybe a cartoon movie of something like that, but the story was not finished because Marx clearly says that people were playing much faster compared to the original tempi, I should say, being the metronome marks. So we added 25% to this playback speed, and actually I could also add 50% because that's way faster. Then you get this result. Let's do it just for fun. And so the conclusion of the video was very simple, I think. When you compare the whole beat version versus the Cyborg Alberto version in 96 single beat, and you plug that information in this book of Marx, in that one passage, you can easily say the single beat version is not possible. Go 25% faster, go 50% faster, Marx even, but that's for another time, makes the case that in some cases people play double the speed of what Beethoven actually had in mind. We will cover that story in other videos. If you want me to do that, leave it in the comments. It's really cool. But it doesn't make any sense to start from the idea that Marx had a single beat reading in his mind, because then what he writes about these pieces does not make any sense at all. But that was not the end of the story. Reading texts of the past, the 19th century, is super cool if you just change your perspective from the single beat modern reading to a whole beat perspective, a whole beat kind of pendulum-like reading of the metronome, where you take 2 ticks for 1. It's that simple. And if you read the texts of the past, especially the 19th century, from that perspective, from that new perspective, there is a world that's opening for you. And in this video, we're going to turn the page, just like reading for your kids. We turn another page and there is another universe. There is another, not fairy tale, I would say in this case, a new reality. And so I would like to take you through a few pages here that are obviously in Marx's book, a few pages back compared to the passage that I shared with you in last week's video. Let me know in the comment if you really enjoy this format. It's kind of nerdy stuff, I know, but it's also here where you have to be in order to really learn to put your feet like firmly on the ground of this tempo reconstruction thing. It's so easy to say, okay, but this is possible, that is possible, to connect the dots, which are dots that are not supposed to be connected. You really have to dive into these texts and to read them with the understanding of this whole beat perspective and see what happens. And of course, reading more than just Marx. This is also interesting because we are going to learn that people in the 19th century, even people like Marx, who were a little bit conservative, if not real conservative people, how they dealt with that music of the past. And I want to make this point before we dive into the text itself. Oftentimes, I hear people say, when they point to, for instance, a recording made by Alfred Cortot, yeah, but that recording is very fast and it shows how Chopin played because he was a student of Chopin. And I have to keep repeating over and over again what you hear from these people, if it are acoustical recordings, is how people played in that time. There was not such a thing as a tradition that was kept from generation on generation. We even don't do that today. While we are looking back to the past, we still want to go forward, to look forward. Very few people look really backward in order to reconstruct something in the first stage without implying their own personality, so to say. Of course, I heard recently somebody say like, yeah, reading a score or reconstructing a score without your own input, that's boring. That's like, you lack fantasy, you lack creativity. That's not true. When you do that, when you really want to reconstruct, you have to use your entire imagination, personality, but you need that, but you base all of that on facts that you can just reconstruct. In this case, this is a metronome mark. That's the frequency per minute. It's very easy. So in the 19th century, as in the early 20th century, as in the mid-19th century, as in the beginning of the 19th century, as in the 18th century, when people talked about tradition, they meant an evolved tradition. When Cortot, of course, these people of the early 20th century, they kind of abused also their status, their connections. That, of course, sold their career. That gave them concerts, and from the time that recordings were available, that was, of course, a huge selling position. If you say like, okay, I'm kind of a student of Chopin. But they all knew, or they didn't know. But we can see that clearly when we look back into the past, that what they did was not reconstruct really what Chopin had in mind, as if Cortot was really dealing with that. Of course not. Of course not. It was the performance practice of the 1920s. And so when you go back in time, when you would read stuff in the end of the 19th century, even students of students, there was kind of duality. They knew, of course, better in the 19th century than in the 20th century how things were in the past. But this idea of making progress in art as well, instrument building, composition techniques, that was so strong. Still today, we still live in that era of progress, that when they write about the past, we always have to be careful. What is the context? What is the position of this person? Here in the case of Marx, as we will read his book or a few pages, he was on the conservative side, I would say. He was concerned about the legacy of his youth, the younger years that he had, in which he lived in the time of Beethoven, and he was one of those, like Marshallus, who've seen things change so drastically that he felt the need to write about that. But even in this case, as we will see, and that's a big lesson you have to remember when you read stuff of the past, even here you have this dual element pointing to the current generation of 1863. So his younger colleagues, so to say, saying, guys, beware, be aware, be careful. You're playing much faster than people used to play in the past, even pointing to metronome marks as the correct tempo. So that makes the musicology standpoint of today untenable. You have here one source that points to the metronome marks of the past, the same for which I have to invent Cyborg Alberto in order to give you an impression of what that single beat rendition would be. But they point to that Cyborg Alberto, at least from the modern musicology standpoint, as this point of departure, on top of which they said, guys, you're playing way faster than that. That should be end of the story for single beat. It's not defendable anymore, that position, if only from this book. But even Marx will want to just create this little bit of wiggle room, that, okay, but can we not just have a little of our own creativity as an input in that music? And there's nothing wrong with that. Just saying that's the kind of situation, that's the starting point, that's the positioning of Marx here. And by the way, if these people were really meticulously, seriously, I would say, or serious in reconstructing that past, of course, keeping that past close to them, Marx here would have played still on a Graf piano of 1820. But he didn't. Nobody did. Not a single pianist in that time still played on an original Viennese piano. In fact, it's even worse. They would keep the piano if that belonged to Beethoven probably, but otherwise they would just move on with the time, and they played on what was available and new and the state of art in that time. So everything you read, you have to take with a grain of salt, but in the case of Marx, there is a strong message. So let's go through that. He starts writing about tempo, and that's cool, because we all care about the tempo. We are tempo nerds, right? Leave it in the comments if you are also. It's a fascinating thing, right? Once you dive into that, cool. So let's go. The tempo, he writes, time, is, as is well known, the most general expression for the rate of movement of a tone series. Well, that's beautifully said. Must be a German. Germans have these beautifully crafted definitions. You have to sometimes read twice or three times, but once you get it, it's precise. And therefore of the life in which the same is to stand forth and operate. It is essential, therefore, to discover first the proper tempo and then to follow it. Read that sentence and take it on its merits. It is essential It doesn't say important. It doesn't say like first thing you have to do is find the tempo. No, he says it's essential, therefore, to discover first the proper tempo and then to follow it. Just compare that to that one sentence that I quote oftentimes from Czerny, like the smallest deviation of time destroys the entire composition, by which he obviously means the character of the composition as the composer had it in mind. Marx doesn't go that far yet, but he underlines the importance. It's the first thing you have to do is find the right tempo, the proper tempo for that piece, and then to follow it. The accomplishment of this is brought about by musical training in general. Okay, that is obviously true. And if you talk about like, okay, we are going to play a piece of music as it is played today, then of course the education will teach you how to find that tempo, because the only thing you have to do is like kind of listen to pianists, to teachers, and then just from there you learn like what kind of movements there are, and that will of course enable you to also find your own tempo, which is in that generation of that time or that tradition actually the correct tempo. Of course, for us it's not applicable anymore because we want to reconstruct what was in Beethoven's mind, and that's more than 200 years ago. So it was very difficult to say, okay, when you go to conservatory today in 2024, you will learn by your musical training to find the proper tempo. That's no longer existent. For that, we need the metronome marks. Establishment of tempo seems rather simple. Of course, he's saying the opposite, that the choice of tempo is not a simple thing. It seems simple. For the composers themselves, at least the later ones among them, Beethoven indicated tempo. And by that he means, as we will see, not the metronome mark yet. He means by that the Italian tempo words. So, of course, in Bach's works, you have much less Italian tempo words than in Beethoven. Bach started with that. He didn't start with that, but it was something that was more and more common practice. And so Beethoven, obviously, every movement, every piece that he wrote or composed has an Italian tempo word. If only these indications were plain and always feasible. Yeah, that would be great. And that would mean if the andantes or adagios or whatever were very not correct, but like very precise and really gave us the opportunity to come to the correct, precise tempo indication, well, then we would not have had the need, nor Beethoven, nor any other composer, for the metronome. But this is by no means always the case, exactly. With reference to the old markings Allegro Adagio, this uncertainty has been recognized for half a century. 1863 minus 50 years is 1813, so we are about at the time where the metronome was invented or introduced. And by the way, the metronome was not the first device. It was just a device that survived and that was like promoted in the best way. Melzel was an incredibly gifted marketeer. There were lots of devices that were like invented or created or pushed for, even in the 18th century, and also after the metronome. So people sometimes think, okay, but the metronome was just there; it came out of the blue. No, it was like in like not a tradition. It was like in a series of like attempts to get to that to a timekeeper or to a device that really allowed the composer to fixate the tempo for once and for all. That desire, that wish started already in the 17th century at the French courts with Lully and the operas. Okay. It's well known that the Allegro movement is to be more rapid than the Adagio. That's still true today. One of the things we can relate to. But what is the absolute measurement of these movements? And are passages marked with the same tempo? He means really all of them of the same rapidity of movement. He means, of course, is every Allegro is similar to another Allegro? Obviously not. You have note values, you have harmonic patterns, and what have you. So Allegro is not equal to another Allegro. That's what he says. These doubts were, as is known, to have been removed by the Melzel metronome, by means of which absolute measurement of movement can be given. And I know, guys, we are now really deep in the nerdy stuff. And so if you're still here, let it know in the comment. I really want to know what kind of audience I'm talking to right now. But for me, this is like gold going through this. I could do this for you, making videos for you for the rest of my life like this, because it gives also for me, but hopefully also for you, like a better understanding. And one of the things I want to point out here, when you read this, you could just skip the page, you could just turn the page and say, okay, yeah, metronome is there, blah, 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 blah. We know that. No, read that sentence. I mean, really read it. So the doubts caused by the Italian tempo words have been removed by Melzer's metronome, as is known. That addition. He didn't do it deliberately, but for us it's gold. Why? We today, we write books, doctoral theses full of explanations why these metronome marks do not work. And granted, you will not always, in fact, very seldomly read in those articles, peer-reviewed articles, the fact that these metronome marks are actually impossible. We touched upon something like in one of the previous videos where we talked about an article written by Martin Norton in 2013, The Impossible Czerny metronome marks, where it's like highly untenable or like highly improbable. But the word impossible is very hard to write, because it's like, what do you do when you write those metronome marks are impossible? As a scholar, as a researcher, what's there left to solve? You know, there is nothing left when you acknowledge the fact as a researcher that statistically enough metronome marks are impossible. Then the way we are approaching them has to be wrong. That's the paradigm shift we're talking about. And so here, Marx, like a contemporary of Beethoven, he writes in 1863, these doubts were, as is known, to have been removed by Melzer's metronome. So everybody knew that the metronome marks given by the Beethovens removed all doubts. And compare that to 2024, there are only doubts left with the metronome marks. It's in front of our eyes, guys. I mean, absolute measurements, no targets, absolute precise measurements. And everybody knows that the metronome removed all doubts. That sentence is the only thing you need in order to abandon a single beat reading of the historical metronome marks in the 19th century. Not all of them, but I mean, there is, let's say, Beethoven, Schumann, the majority of them. Because single beat was something that existed in the 19th century as well, but not on a large scale. Beethoven declared himself in favor of the metronome, of course, and has marked several compositions metronomically. There's a Bates. For example, the symphonies and partially the quartets up to Opus 95. By the way, the string quartets, highly problematic metronome marks. The book will have some interviews with string players, obviously, where that is actually taken in question. I'm not going into detail. That will be for another video. Among the pianoforte works, only the large sonata, Opus 106, the Hammerklavier sonata. In the Ninth Symphony, however, it occurred that the master unconsciously gave two decidedly opposite metronomic indications and finally declared no metronome at all. Those who have a right feeling do not need it, and those who have not will not be helped by it. By the way, the quote-unquote problematic metronome marks in the Ninth Symphony, there are few, three, if I remember well. but they're not so problematic. The context of everything makes it clear what they actually originally should be. And before you think that we find our own solutions, actually, there is a general agreement. I even agree with the assumptions or the corrections that modern scholars like Clive Brown or Martin Noorden made about the Ninth Symphony. Not all of them, but it's not so problematic that we don't know what to do or that it changes the Ninth Symphony so drastically. Yeah, for the Allegro Vivace alla Marzia, there it's an increase, it's doubling the tempo, but it's obvious there. I'm not going to go into detail here. If you want me to talk about that, I'm happy to do. That's even more nerdy stuff, I would say, and I would just be happy for that because I really liked I like tempo research, you know. It's like that's spending part of my life to that. The quote here, no metronome at all, is not related to the Ninth Symphony. That is quoted in Schindler's biography, I think, at an occasion where Beethoven, he always asked when people came from a concert where his music was played, like, how was the tempo? How did I play it? And frustration of people in his time not following the metronome indications. I mean, it's humans do not change that much in that regard. Apparently, he was very frustrated, and of course, in that context, he said like, okay, then you know what? Forget about it. Whoever has the right feeling, they will know what tempo I had in mind, and for the rest, like, they're helpless anyways. I'm not saying that is the majority of us today, but I mean, I'm not joking partly, of course, but you get my point. And by the way, also that other big B, Johannes Brahms, said the same thing to Clara Schumann, who was metronomizing the works of her husband in the edition that she was preparing for Breitkopf, I think. Where Brahms said, like, you really want to metronomize all of that? It will take you 1 year to find the correct tempo. 1 year. Clara Schumann and Brahms. I mean, those two persons together, they would find the ideal tempo for Schumann's work, right? Instantly. No, 1 year. And then Brahms says, like, okay, but to then discover that actually good musicians don't need it. Yes. And implying that the rest will not take care, not even take notice of it, which was a prophetic sentence. We don't. Well, we do here. Brahms, listen to my recording, our recording, with Alberto, of course. That's a joke. But okay, let's continue. It's evident, therefore, that Beethoven did not overestimate the value of the metronome. And of course, that is the dual element. On one hand, like, okay, but this was how it was played in the past. But let's create a little bit of room for me personally. That's now it kicks in. That's he's using or abusing that quote, taking it out of context, actually to create a little bit of room. And we're going to read that. However valuable the instrument may be to the composer, for a safe placing of the tempo desired by him, an absolute determination of the tempo is not in accordance with the spirit of art. That's clearly the 19th century standpoint. The later you go, the more you read about that. And with persons like Marx, you have this conflict because he needs the metronome marks in order to point people to the fact that they are playing too fast. But for himself, like, he wants to be a little bit like, it's far into the age of enlightenment, you know, the focus is on the individual person. It's me, it's my tempo, it's my Beethoven, sir. It's not, of course, we are the co-creator. We have actually school sources, there will be in the book, of course, that speak about this, like why the metronome was hated so much in that time. Because it ripped musicians of the possibility, at least morally, so to say, because they did it anyways, of playing a piece in their own tempo when the composer marked in his regard, the best tempo. So you had to overrule the composer, and there was still some struggle to do that. But on a massive scale, of course, people would do that. Therefore, also, if you talk about duration, we had a few years back this struggle with that document. Was not a struggle. I mean, it was a struggle in the sense that the document was made from such a biased position that all these documents are hard to take down. The book will do that. There will be a chapter dedicated to durations, don't worry. But the fact is that if you know that musicians in that time actually didn't care about that anymore, even Marx if you would hear a concert by Marx, he's announcing that he will take a different tempo compared to Beethoven. And it's that. So what is that duration if that data is accurate already? Worth nothing. Nothing. You don't have the context. You don't have the context of the player. You have nothing. There are some data that are really valuable, but again, that will lead too far. I'll come back to durations if you want. Again, leave it in the comments if you want me to talk about that. So, what Marx here is doing is saying like, okay, but guys, we can also we can. And by the way, that's true. You can create if you have the Fifth Symphony like an 84 last movement, if I'm not mistaken. If you have 84. There, do you destroy the music when you play an 88 or 92 for that matter? Of course not. Of course not. And even Beethoven, it is a choice by Beethoven. It's his ideal choice, the metronome he gave for that movement and for all the other movements. I can see that. So if you happen to be in a situation where you have 50,000 people in your orchestra, of course that will affect the tempo. If you have a large cathedral in which you play, that will affect the tempo. If you want to do it in a little bit of a different way, that is possible. In the words of Czerny, you change the character of the piece, which is cool. And by the way, can I say that I'm working on my notation course related to the Beethoven symphonies. I'm taking you through all the symphonies one by one. There will be 60 videos only for that, and no worries. It will be a premium course with a lot of content, but we also create shortcuts. But one of the things I will do for the student, and if you happen to be one of them in the future, that will be cool. By the way, all the full Beethoven experience, that's just a package that we offer around. This link is in the description box. We'll get that for free. But one of the things is like I will take our Fifth Symphony and do some minor or maybe some major, I've not decided yet, speed deviations in order to take you through the fact that, going from 84 to 88, of course it's possible. But you change the piece, you change the character, and if you listen to it carefully over and over again, the differences become bigger and bigger and bigger. So there is nothing wrong doing that. That's also not what we want to imply. That's also not, sometimes people say like, yeah, but Wim, you want the whole world to play like that. No, we think that playing according to these metronome marks for us was total liberation. And also the idea that you have this ticking device and you connect these frequencies. Like it's kind of in the fourth dimension. Beethoven had that metronome, not this one, but a similar device in his workroom. So what you hear is what he heard or saw, for that matter. That's so cool. But you, of course, it's for everyone to decide whether you want to deviate a little bit or like play it in double tempo. The only thing we do here is reconstruct what that metronome mark or what these metronome marks actually meant. And from there you start. And you see it here already in the 19th century with Adolf Marx. He wants to have also a little bit of room. And so he makes the case for that. He's a little bit struggling with that. So he takes that out of context quote. And then he will also do something that is like, okay, he will make the case here. So yeah, you have your mood, you have the amount of vibrating material, by which he means the size of the orchestra, before you start thinking other things. The breadth of the room in which the tone waves are to be developed, they require consideration. Yeah, we see it. I know it. Mr. Marx, you play your own tempo. I don't care. He even says like this probably explains the unanimous declaration of Czerny, Madame von Erdmann, which by the way was one of the big Beethoven players in that time. As she played oftentimes in the concerts that Czerny organized in his house. And others who associated constantly with Beethoven that he played his compositions differently every time. Okay. That's possible. I don't know that quote, I have to say. I've not seen that. But I can totally see that Beethoven, that why not? Why not? The point is here that even if it were true, that doesn't change anything on that metronome mark, and you should not take one for the other. You cannot say, okay, but we've seen also in the last week's video that that Czerny gave 96 half note for the Haslinger edition, and his pianoforte school opus 500 he gives half note 80. Well, those are two different tempi. He was looking for that ideal tempo, and of course for us now today it's impossible to know which of those tempi that he gave was the closest to what he thought Beethoven was at opus 500, because it was later. He was working on a later edition that he didn't finish, where he went back partially to the Haslinger. So for him it was a struggle. It shows how difficult it was even for a contemporary living in that time, like to come, and that was his intention. But if we cannot reach 96 and we go to 80, that's not the same thing. We just deliberately abandoned 96, not because we thought that it was not close to what Beethoven had in mind, because for the simple reason that we cannot play it. That's, of course, a completely different argument. And that's an absolute different decision-maker game. I mean, we don't follow these metronome marks. We create that room. Not what Marx wanted. Marx wanted to have room for his personal input. Like he felt it. Like maybe he also applied on a different piano. That changes a lot. Of course, I can see that. But Karl Czerny changing from 96 to 80, it's not the same as saying like, okay, I cannot play 96, so therefore I go to 80. And so I see that Karl Czerny also went from 96 to 80, so I'm fine. I'm in good company. No, it's completely different. Of course, you can see that. All of you here, I know you're all smart guys, but you should be surprised how often that argument is used, even in like the work and the publications of someone like Martin Noorden, who tries to find out. I mean, not criticizing him per se, guys, intelligence, but he is also making that argument, seeing the different metronomizations and saying like, okay, for them it was also a little bit like all over the place, which is not the case, and it's also not really what he says. So for us, it's also fine. It's not the same. You cannot use that as an argument for not following the metronome marks. When Czerny changes that, he changes that because he thought like he came closer to Beethoven. When we do not follow the metronome mark, it's because we cannot play that. And so whatever Beethoven did, and by the way, we think of Beethoven as the greatest pianist of all time. There are records of him saying that the guy didn't practice that much. I mean, in his younger years, yes, we created these images of these people. I think we would be surprised when we heard Beethoven play. Beethoven improvisation, that would be something. And he could still play. He played in 1808 his fourth piano concerto and all the other stuff. But how? And what was the level of these people? We will never know anymore. We cannot compare that to the standards of our town. But hey, I'm not here to downplay Beethoven. And then I come to the point I wanted to make. I think all of the rest was already, I think, interesting. These texts are gold. But then he says we must therefore return to the old markings, the Italian tempo words, which give at least approximate determinations and which yield artistically favorable liberty both to the subjective feeling and to the demands of the moment, besides having authoritative value. So, yeah, Marx, you're losing me here a little bit. I get where you want to go with that, but it's either one or the other. Either the Italian tempo words, as we've seen on the previous page, are not precise enough, and so we replace them by metronome marks, which have an absolute value. But of course, you have then to say, okay, I follow those because I want to play like Beethoven, right? That's a little bit your point to the newer generation. Hey guys, we play way too fast. But in order to create a little bit of like room for yourself, you reinstall the Italian tempo words as having authoritative value. And to be honest, I mean, that doesn't make any sense, of course, but to be honest, he is right. I mean, the Italian tempo words give an extra additional value to the metronome marks. It's just the metronome marks that we have from Beethoven. And for us also, from Czerny and Mosles and all the other people that were surrounding Beethoven's works, I mean, they are really of an authority that we cannot, of course, who are we to discuss the authority of those metronome marks? These people lived in that time. Even Marx had the right to say that. So there is a little bit of this dual feeling that's really important for you to understand, still valid today, and was, of course, in the early 20th century when all these pianists played in these so-called traditional, like Chopin, like Cortot recordings, they even didn't take the metronome marks seriously, only as a justification to speed up. And maybe maybe they have been driving these pianists to play faster and faster. I don't know. I can totally see that. But it was also in the flow of the tradition. That's what they did. They wanted to just shine on stage. It's like still today, the faster you play, the more professional you are considered to be. But that's another discussion, of course. But be aware that this element of tradition that never existed. There is, of course, you can go back from person to person, from tradition to tradition, but not 100%. You have to be looking for the things that didn't change or that might just give a hint on what was still present in the next generation that might come from the previous generation. It's very complex, interesting game to play. Very nerdy stuff, I would say, but it's essential for you to forget the idea that when you listen to Alfred Cortot that you hear Chopin play. There's, I would say, there is even nothing there that really can that there are maybe elements, but there is nothing there fundamental about Cortot's playing. Just saying, like, for that matter, him that is. That can guide you to Chopin's playing. It's not a different universe, it's a different solar system. It is true that even, now it comes, this is important for our cause. It's true that even the old tempo marks, so the adagios, the allegros, the Italian tempo words, have changed their measurement. The tempo is now, 1863, taken much more rapidly. He doesn't say like a little bit, much more rapidly. So if I play here Alberto's Cyborg recording at 50% plus, let's do it again because it's just fun to hear, then I don't think I'm far. This should be possible. When Marx says much more rapidly, well, that's not 25%. I would say that's even more than 50%, but 50%. You can laugh and hope you're doing now, but this is the reality. From a single beat perspective, we have to accept that what Cyborg Alberto just played here was actually the way that people played in 1863. And by the way, this is a Viennese piano. And by the way, this is a state-of-the-art Viennese piano built by one of the best instrument builders on this globe. Brand new. 100% regulated action of these kind of pianos. That's maybe a contradiction, but you get my point. And then he quotes Mozart, and then we can conclude here. There is more to say about Marx. If you want me to make a video about his statement that people played the pieces in double the speed, that could lead to really cool. Sped up cyborg renditions, But then he quotes Mozart, who says the same thing. Like if you cannot bring in fire in a composition with speed, if it's not there, speed won't help you. And then he continues also to say the general principle: the deeper and richer the content, the less does it allow haste, and so forth and so forth. So. These sources, again, are gold. And also what you have to remember, apart from the tradition, and also that doesn't really exist in the sense that we think it exists today. But what you also have to understand is that when going back to the 19th century, from our perspective, a reading text like this, you have to understand the fact that these people also were like not coming from our time, they came from earlier times. And even Marx, who is a conservative voice, he was updating that performance practice. But what we still see there is like this reference to the old tradition. And that's gold for us. The fact that tempi were speeding up much more rapidly. The fact that everybody knows that the metronomes actually made an end on all the doubts that the adagios and the allegros and all the other Italian tempo words actually created, that everybody knew that. In 1863, that's a hell of a statement. How do you explain that? And 50 years later, you see someone like Weingartner actually struggle understanding these metronome marks. Probably, that's my interpretation, he knew about it still, but he couldn't accept the fact that Beethoven was so much lower than people were playing that music in that time, because Beethoven was sped up enormously already in the mid of the 19th century. I had source years about I actually released here on or made a video about here on YouTube. I can do it again from another perspective if you want, because these sources, they tell all of that. And so finally, the point you have to take home is, whenever you hear a musicologist, a teacher, a conductor, a musician say that in the 19th century tempi slowed down because of the Wagner effect, made a video on Parvo Järvi, check it out. I mean, that was quite a statement. You have to stand up and say, sir, that's not correct. Give me one quote that proves that. And there will be no quote. People will give quotes like from these books, like the tempo is now taken much more rapidly, saying like, okay, but that's like Marx's opinion. Meaning that they wanted a slower tempo. Marx wanted a slower tempo. He was accusing the musicians of playing too fast, in a kind of understanding that the musicians were still playing exactly as Beethoven played, like super, inhumanly fast. And of course, introducing this Wagner effect and the romantic feelings and everything that you want to whatever. They wanted to slow down. And so they accused the musicians, those heroes that were still there, safeguarding the Beethoven traditions with their very fast tempo. They wanted to take that tempo down, down, down. But that's not what these sources say. They say the opposite. They say, hell, hey, musicians, you're taking that tempo way too fast compared to how it was done 50 years ago. And Marx was old enough to know, and these people even point to the metronome marks. So there's a complete reverse of the narrative. That's cool, right? And so there you have another bad story. If you happen to watch this like very late in the evening, then I hope you will sleep soundly from this story. You can dream about that. Time traveling to the 19th century, how cool would that be? If you were to pick one moment in history to go back in time, where would your time capsule land? I really want to know that. Leave me that in the comments below. I mean, poor comment section. That will be like carrying so much weight and so much messages. But I guess YouTube will like that because that also feeds the algorithm. But I really would like to know, thinking of that, I think we all are this kind of fantasy, what would you go to Mozart and give him some antibiotics, to just not die? Would you go to Beethoven and say, here, I buy you like 50,000 liters of clean water so you'll never have to suffer again? Something like that? Or pay his debts if he had any to finish that 10th symphony? I don't know. Let me know. Okay, guys, bedtime for many of you maybe, or not. Not for me. It's 5:40 in the afternoon. I have to thank all of you for staying and sticking so long into this video. I also have to thank my Patreons. I'm not doing that enough. Shame on me. But they make me they push me. They also give me the permission, so to say, to record this video for you on a Monday afternoon. And if you want to be a little bit closer to the project, Patreon might be something for you. We're going to update everything on Patreon, not everything, but like we're going to go from a per creation subscription, which was very popular at the time, to a per month subscription, which is actually forced by Patreon because they're going to cancel the first plan. And so we are going to take the opportunity also to make some updates on Patreon, but that's for the coming months. Already now we have very cool podcast where I dive into really deep into this kind of stuff, and also have conversations with Stefan, who's a project manager. We're going to expand on that. with Insiders Updates, in which and now together with Stefan, we take you through all the projects that are going behind the scenes, which is really a lot. So if you want to know what we are doing, the things that I do not share or cannot share or don't have the time to share on YouTube or elsewhere, where is my Instagram manager? Because we would like to do all of that. It's, of course, you can go on our Patreon and then you find insider updates and also concerts, also practicing sessions. I answer your questions. We have hangouts every 2 months, all of that good stuff. So check it out. Thank you for that. And also for now, thank you for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.